Hey guys, welcome back to the next video. In this video, we are going to talk about a new session. So this is going to be introduction to the session, as well as this particular video is also going to talk about some architecture diagram of what we're going to do as part of this session. Now, as you can see on my screen, so what I've done is I have used the same namespace architecture over here, because we are going to continue our namespace and then go to a different level here. So to start with, I'm gonna tell you what is context, because in this section we're gonna discuss about three important topics: context, authentication, authorization. Though in this first few videos we will talk about context, authentication, and then authorization will eventually come in, and we will be configuring authorization as well. In terms of authorization, we'll be covering both role and role bindings. And in terms of authentication, we will be covering user creation. That is something which we will do in the first few videos. Now, you can use the GitHub, which is in the file name of auth-x2-context. So that's a code I've shared you earlier, so that there you can access the information about what I'm actually executing as part of this particular video, or the next few videos, which the code covers that part of it. So if you remember the namespace, right? I have a different session for that previously, before the first part of the question. So there you can understand about the namespace and the use of namespace. Now we understood that the namespace will, within a Kubernetes cluster, you will be able to have different set of configurations separated in namespaces, right? So you will have dev namespace, which has the dev service running with the dev environment working on it with its own port number and stuff as a service. And in testing, we had the similar stuff. In production, we have this similar stuff. And we have configured also different content as well, using the host path option in your volume. And we were able to, we were able to configure these namespaces differently, right? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to expand this concept a little bit more and then create a whole context on top of it. Now, as you can see that there are three layers added on top of this. One is like the context, cluster, and authentication. So as you can see, the context is the first primary layer which we're going to have, and that's going to include a cluster, and it's going to include an auth info. In this example, we are going to use the default cluster, which comes with Kubernetes, called Kubernetes itself. We're not going to create a separate cluster for development environment or desktop production environment. But what we are going to do is we are going to create a development context, test context, and production context. I know that I have not explained you what is context. I'll talk about it in a very short time. Now, we are also going to create a user specific to this particular context, because when you are executing context, or when you want to create a context, you need to have two things. One, you need to have a cluster. Another one is that you need to have the specific user which is going to work in that context. Now, if you ask me, is there a context already exists? Yes, there is already a context exists. That is the default context, which is called Kubernetes admin context, and that exists as part of the default cluster setting, and that's the default context which we will always enter when you actually install Kubernetes. So if you want to switch your context to another one, you first need to create the context, and then only you can switch to another one. Now, let me tell you what is context. Now, if you remember in one of those videos on the part 1 session, I would have explained you that there is a context which is part of your examination, where they will be asking you to run a command which will switch the context. Now, context happens in the layer of configuration. So which means that you can have multiple configuration sets. Like for example, the dev context will have its own environment for your configuration. It will have your own set of items, and then it can also have a namespace under it, and then you can define all these items related to that namespace as part of this context. Now, what was something which we're able to do without context? So without the context, you can see kube control get pods -a. Now this is a command which it will show you all namespaces. Now you can see that I've already executed these commands. Okay, so it has created dev namespace, prod namespace, test namespace, and it has the relevant pods within that namespace. Now what is the problem here is that now I have to give -a, and I have to like type every time a specific namespace for me to retrieve that data. For example, if I want to get the details about the deployment, right? I type get deploy -n dev. Now I'll get the development related deployment details. If I want to get the prod, I give the -n prod over here, and I get the details of this one. But I don't want to do this because this is a long process, and I have to remember all these namespace. I have to kube control get namespace, and then I will get all these namespace. Rather than doing this, there is another way, which is context. Now, what I would do rather than getting the deployment for this particular environment, so I will enter into the realm of dev, and there I will only see. So when I do get nodes, I will not see any other nodes. I'm sorry, get pods. I will not see any other pods rather than the dev pod. Okay. So the default, what I have over here, which goes to the default namespace, as you can see, it goes to default namespace. It would rather go to the dev namespace, and it will show you the content of the dev. And when I switch my context to prod user, it will go to the prod namespace, and it will show me the pods related to pods. Prod environment. So this is more easy for you to manage than the namespace itself, because namespace gives you that hierarchy of Kubernetes oriented configuration, but then you have to, every time when you're in the default namespace, you have to switch and select that namespace correctly and then get to that. That is a different process, and you need to incorporate that into every single item. But then when you have created a context, now that's going to be mapped to the namespace eventually, which is what we are planning to. And you don't have the overhead of doing all those, -n namespace. You don't have to give that, because you obviously will be part of that namespace by default, and you will be able to access that. You will have full control on that namespace. Now, this is the reason why we have created such, they have created such a concept called context. And for context, it is mandatory that you should have a cluster and authentication information. I hope that this architecture helps you understand what we are going to do on the next few videos in terms of creating this user. Now, do remember that Kubernetes does not have passwords. So if I'm going to create user, there's no way that I can give a password for the user. So how the authentication happens, authentication happens via SSL. So we need to create SSL certificate for our user, and then align it as part of, we need to align it as part of your user credentials. You need to give the credentials in the certificate format. And then we are going to create a context using cluster and authentication. So likewise, we need to do that. We will see on the next video how to, do the hands-on for this. We will cover both the OpenSSL, which is the SSL creation, as well as the context creation on one video. And then on the next video, we will be looking at working with this options, like how do we check and validate all those things. So we will talk that on the third video. And after that, there is a problem. There is obviously that an error, because that's where the authorization comes into the picture. So I want to show you how authorization works and why it is so important. So if I show you that error, then you will definitely understand why authorization is important. And then on the fourth video, we will be fixing the authorization issues. And I'll show you the architecture diagram for that before we proceed to the hands-on. I'll make you understand why we do that, and then we will go ahead with the rest of the items. Thank you again for watching this video. I'll see you on the next one.